morning. Actually, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Well, good morning to you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, I'm exhausted. Sleep is challenging.
Yeah, no shit.
It's like one of those situations where you fall asleep finally, and that's a challenge. And then like you wake up at 2, 3 in the morning and just, and
Yeah.
it does nothing is going to happen. Like there's
Yeah.
no forcing it. You can try all the
Uh-huh.
tricks in the world, all the fucking things that you can do, and it still is
Uh-huh.
just the same outcome.
Yeah. That is interesting. I have that too. Like there's some wake ups where you just know, like, I'm not going back to sleep from this one.
It's hard because I almost experience that every day.
Every
And
day you have that?
yeah,
At
I
like
probably
3?
like have good quality sleep, which I would quantify as like 5 hours total, maybe like 4 to 5 times a month. And every other night is like
Wait, how many hours? 5
maybe
hours?
4 or 5 tops.
You have that. So wait, 4 or 5 hours. You have that
That's
4 or
like
5
top.
times a month.
Yeah.
Patrick, that's really, really bad.
It's
You
very
don't need me
bad.
to tell you this, but that's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
oh my gosh.
I
Like you're sleeping like you have a newborn, but without the newborn.
yeah, and it's been all my life, so it's like it's challenging. And it's like I constantly ask myself, like, how the hell do I even get through the day when I'm running on like, a couple of scattered, fragmented hours of sleep every night?
Yeah.
And it's a great segue into what we're going to talk about today, which is
It's just sleep.
sleep and neurodiversity. So here we are. And I know we wanted to start recording as soon as we got in the room because we always have these conversations. So I just want to welcome everyone to the Divergent Conversations podcast. I'm your co-host, Patrick 𝗿𝗀𝘀.
And I'm Dr. McMahon. I mean, oh my gosh. Wow. That was weird. I'm Dr. Neff. That was my maiden name. I am
Yikes.
Dr. Neff. I clearly have not fully woken up.
So Megan is on the West Coast. It is about 12 o'clock here on the East Coast. So Megan's waking up. I haven't slept. We're going to talk about
We're trying to get our names right.
the elusive topics of sleep while also trying to juggle saying our names correctly and being on the air. So we want to give everyone a real glimpse into what it's like every day as a neurodivergent person, entrepreneur, therapist, all the things. So today we are going to talk about sleep. Megan's going to take much more of the clinical side of it. I'm going to complain about how fucking tired I am. And
Oh, I'm going to do that too.
so it's so challenging, right? Because our executive functioning is already having such a hard time as it is. And then you
Right.
throw into the mix like this inability to sleep, to rest. Like, I don't know about you, but I don't nap. I wish I could. I'm envious of all of you who can do that. I'm envious of my wife who like falls asleep and is like snoring with her eyes closed like a minute after saying
Oh
she's
my
going to bed,
goodness.
and I'm like watching her like, what the fuck? This is witchcraft. This is ridiculous.
I know. Yeah, my spouse has such a consistent sleep routine. He goes to sleep at like between 9 or 10, and then he wakes up at like 5 or 6. He wakes up early, but he has like a solid sleep block, and that I'm so jealous of. I, for the life of me, cannot, even though I'm so exhausted all day, I cannot get myself to fall asleep before midnight.
Yeah. So what is happening for you? Like, you're exhausted, you feel it physically, mentally, you're tired, but like midnight still is 6, 7 hours away. What are you doing in that time period?
So that's actually something I'm trying to work on right now because it feels like kind of a time zap, which I don't like. That impacts my mood. So I'm typically working on something. I'm typically working on what I call bucket B work, which is like I don't need to deeply focus. So like last night I was refreshing a bunch of my infographics and getting them up on my website and like kind of mindless stuff. So I'm typically doing that kind of thing. Sometimes I'll get hooked into some sort of rabbit trail, which then keeps me up later, which is very common, particularly among ADHDers. Um,
What's the most
so
recent
yeah.
trail you've been on?
Um, what my most recent one is kind of fun. My so over the weekend, I have 3 talks in February that I'm prepping. I think I've told that to you. And I have so much work I need to do for these. And this weekend, I was just really struggling of like, I know I should run through my slides. I know I should go record videos, and I cannot get myself to do it, which is not typically when the urgency hits. Typically am able to get going. And I was talking to my spouse of just like, I'm so tired. And one thing he said that was helpful, he's like, for February, you're actually doing pretty good. And he talked about how past January, February, he just knows like I'm kind of going to be a miserable person to live with during these months. So he was saying, you should like get on a flight and go somewhere sunny. Cause I'm in Oregon. It's like the winters are literally depressing here. I'm not saying that metaphorically.
Overcast, it's gloomy, dark, gray, raining.
It's terrible. So my most recent rabbit trail was looking into flights for like Hawaii or California or Arizona and packages and trying to figure out, could I get away for 10 days sometime? So I've spent way too much time not sleeping, trying to figure out a flight to go somewhere to get more energy, which is, there's some irony in all that.
You and I have talked about, for me, the energizing contribution of traveling. And I still stand by this, and we should probably have an episode on this at some point of like the neurodivergent travel experience and why it can be energizing, because I think it seems counterintuitive to say like this autistic person really enjoys going out into the world and traveling and meeting people and connecting, but there's so much.
I don't like meeting people, but I like traveling.
Right. The stimulation piece, it's just like that, the new location, the new environment, the new temperatures, the new sights, the new food for some people. I really think that it can be so helpful in a lot of ways. And it sounds like you really need some warm weather in your life. I love rabbit trails that are travel related because I'm like, I get really wrapped up in like the fantasy of traveling and like all the places I want to go. Which seems more interesting than the one I've been on recently, which was like Google searching how to sell my group practice and like figuring out. Yeah, I know. And some of my clinicians are going to hear this and be like, what the fuck? It's just, you have a bad day and that's where your brain closes.
Yeah.
Hey, I don't want to do this anymore.
Well, that's interesting. Both of us, our rabbit trails are fantasy related.
Yeah. Mine always are, I think, for the most part, unless worry related, where then it's like, I'm thinking worst case scenario and going down that road. But usually it's fantasy related. And I think there's something to be said about that, especially for autistic folks where fantasy is relatable and maybe safe, and maybe there's the ability to feel playful and connection. And I think that's why I so often default to like, my wife knows when I'm checked out in January, February, or in general, if the Lord of the Rings or the Hobbit or Game of Thrones is on TV, she's like, oh, I'm not going to talk to you today. And I'm like, yeah, cool. Glad we have that understanding.
Yeah. Both of us, I think, sound really fortunate and lucky in that we have spouses that understand us. And like my husband's the same. He knows like if I've come back from a speaking trip or from a long day, or if it's February or January, like I'm not going to be very verbal and I'm going to have less energy. And he's incredibly supportive and helps with the kids a ton. But yeah, I realize not everyone has a partner who understands those energy fluctuations and will get like irritated at their partner for not being more verbal or not being more energized, which I think is a really hard dynamic when I see that clinically.
Yeah, I think, we were talking about autistic burnout last time we met, and talking about if you have the resources to protect your energy and to recharge and to step away and do all the things, and a lot of people don't. That's also a really great point, that not everyone has that support in their lives, whether it's from partnership or close friendship, where someone just doesn't have to, you don't have to explain yourself to them. You don't have to kind of feel guilty about how you're not showing up or how you're presenting. And and it takes time, obviously, in any partnership, but to have that mutual understanding where your partner, your spouse is not having these expectations of you, or
Mhm.
like feeling resentful, or why aren't you talking more? Why aren't you engaging more? Why aren't you more present? And they just kind of know intuitively, like, oh, this is just where Patrick or Megan is at. It's really weird. My sister's name is Megan, so saying Patrick and Megan in the same sentence just felt really strange.
Mhm. Mhm. Brings up sibling associations. Totally.
Negative sibling associations.
Oh, okay.
And she'll probably, maybe she'll listen to this one day and curse my name too. Um,
You're
yeah,
making a lot of people pissed off at you with this episode.
that's because I'm so fucking tired. I think that it just means like
I was gonna
there's
say
no
that your
filter.
filter's probably off.
Yeah, there's no filter. It's just like that nauseating feeling of disorientation and sleep
Mhm.
deprivation. And so, do you mind like just sharing for folks who are listening why it's so challenging for those of us who are neurodivergent to go to sleep, to
Yeah.
get consistent sleep? We
Yeah.
make a lot of graphics about it. They're very
Mhm.
helpful. I
Yeah.
share them with practice staff all the time.
Oh,
Uh,
cool.
but I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you did this. After I was diagnosed, I started Googling every weird thing about me to see if it was possibly related to my autism. And sleep was one of the first ones I Googled because I've always had just weird sleep stuff like sleep paralysis. I don't know if you've ever experienced that. It's really disorienting. Um, and just insomnia and other sleep issues. So it's one of the first things I researched, and it's really interesting because when a person's diagnosed autistic or ADHD, rarely are they also told, and this co-occurs with this handful of sleep disorders. Um, so first, from a like neurological, biological, we're just more vulnerable to sleep disorders. So things like we tend to have a flattened melatonin curve. So that kick of melatonin a lot of people get that cues them to go to sleep. A lot of us have a more flattened curve, or we're getting it later in the night. We also, there's a gene mutation a lot of us have that influences our circadian rhythm. So a lot of us have a delayed circadian rhythm or just a dysregulated one. And then we're more vulnerable to things like narcolepsy, sleep apnea, and other sleep obstruction disorders. So biologically, there's a lot going on that makes us vulnerable. But then outside of that, there's things like sensory issues. If you're a heightened sensory person, getting comfortable at night, being woken up by a snoring partner or by something outside of the house. So we get woken up more easily and have a harder time just getting comfortable. Um, I'm curious, it's probably also related to our more reactive nervous systems. Like you have to be in a relaxed state to be able to enter deep sleep. And a lot of us have more hypervigilant nervous systems. So there's a lot of vulnerabilities we have that make sleep pretty difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you were able to share that way for everyone listening, because there's a lot of things going on beneath the surface that are impacting you. And I know for myself, I'm restless. I have that constant anxiety and nervous energy, and it's very hard to get comfortable. So deep sleep is
Mhm.
not something I'm familiar with, because the slightest noise, the slightest sound, like my dog getting up to go get water, like my dog whining or snoring too. It's just like every little thing builds on itself, and it's so hard.
Patrick, you have a terrible sleep environment. If you were my client, like we'd be working on your sleep environment. It's terrible.
It's terrible. And we have a senior dog who sleeps on a bed on the floor, but she's restless at night and will get up to drink water. And like I will
Mhm.
hear her get up, and then you'll hear her like her click clacking through the house and like drinking all the water, then coming back and like scratching her blanket to go to sleep. And you're just like, oh my fucking God. Like, if I was just asleep for an hour and that's what woke me up, it's just
Mhm.
infuriating. And um, it's challenging. And, temperature sensitivity, all the things that come with it, even like having that restless leg syndrome and just being really uncomfortable. So really trying to figure out ways to make your sleep environment more sleep hygienic, or, whatever works for you in terms of just being able to get some rest, because it's so crucial. And,
Mhm.
otherwise you're just kind of flying by on autopilot all the time, and it doesn't feel good to kind of move through life like that.
I'm still like seriously trying to figure out how you do it with 4 to 5 hours of sleep, because you do a lot. And that sounds really painful.
Yeah, it is it's really painful. The thing that I hate the most, like I'm so used to operating on that amount of sleep where I can push through and have the conversation that we're having right now and do what I need to do today without it being too overwhelming. But when I used to have I used to have an active, pretty intense gambling addiction. And I can remember nights where I stayed at a casino till 6 a.m. till the sun came up and then drove 2 hours home. And, then you're trying to fall asleep with that. It's just that feeling of like you're nauseous, you're disoriented, like everything
Mhm.
hurts. It's just uncomfortable and the whole day is ruined. And,
Yep.
I have a day or two like that every month. And thankfully it's significantly less than it used to be where that type of situation would be like almost weekly, but now it's once or twice a month where you just don't sleep and you kind of know as it's happening that this is what you're in store for. And it sucks.
Mhm.
I mean, and I used to try to force myself back to sleep. That never works. So just getting up, getting out of the environment, getting out of your bedroom, and I'll
Mhm.
go lay on the couch. I'll go like try to do some mindfulness activities. I'll try to like even do some like exercise if I have to, if I'm feeling really restless, but like I've never found the magic solution yet. I'm still
Uh-huh.
searching.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so when you wake up, I was gonna ask you what you do when you wake up at 3 and you're up for the rest of the night. So it sounds like you kinda go do something relaxing.
I'll try. I used to do the thing that I think a lot of us do or have done where you're like staring at the clock saying, okay, it's 3 o'clock. But if I fall
Which
asleep right now,
which totally
uh,
feeds the insomnia loop. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah,
Then I'll get 4 hours of sleep or 5 hours of sleep
yeah.
until 8 a.m.
Uh-huh,
Then it's
uh-huh.
3:30, then it's 4, then it's
Mhm.
4:02. And it's like it just builds on that. Like that loop is you
Yeah.
can't get out of it.
Yeah. So I used to work in oncology, and so I was doing more health psychology, and so sleep was actually a big issue that I worked with folks on, and protecting that relationship to the bed is such a huge intervention of once the brain starts to associate the bed with a stressful thing, it that just totally fuels that insomnia loop. And exactly what you're saying, that anxious rumination of like clock watching, and then the anxious rumination of I'm going to be so tired tomorrow, all these things that activate our sympathetic nervous system, making it almost impossible to fall back to sleep. So it's really the like neuroscience and the science behind sleep and brain associations, I think is really fascinating. It hasn't helped me completely crack the sleep code for me, but I do find it really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I do too. And I think, yeah, the rumination piece is really challenging. And that's why I encourage anyone who's listening to get technology out of your bedrooms and,
Yep.
really try hard to only associate your bedroom with sleep, which is something, a lot of CBTI therapists and or sleep specialists would say, like, have a cool, dark environment and
Mhm.
I put my phone in a completely different room because otherwise I'll go on it and I'll just start scrolling through it or answering messages at night. And
Mhm.
that's just going to activate again. And so doing the little things, but even doing the little things and still having these experiences can be really frustrating. And
Yeah.
some of it feels like you kind of are waving the white flag where you're just like,
Uh-huh.
I don't know what else to do at this point. I've tried hypnosis, I've tried sleeping medications, I've done sleep studies, and it's just like, all right,
Did
here we
they
are.
did they ever find anything with sleep studies?
No, no, no form of apnea, just
Hmm.
really, really bad insomnia. And it's
Wow.
just, it's either, it's the combination of what you said. It's the constant worrying, rumination,
Yeah.
inability to get relaxed. And then it's the sensory stuff. It's the
Yeah.
inability to like, just be comfortable.
Yeah.
And once your anxiety starts ramping up, everything is
Hmm.
uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Like the smell of your pillow, the firmness of it,
Uh-huh.
the
Uh-huh.
texture of your blanket, whatever it is. It's just like, it's hard. I wish I
Yeah.
wish I had the solution. I really do.
Yeah, no, and that's part of like sustains the stress cycle is typically someone like you or me or the average autistic or ADHD person has tried so many things before they go to a medical provider. And then the medical provider will often like list out these things that they've already tried, they've already researched, like, and that gets back to, I do think when working with sleep issues, some level of acceptance that my sleep is going to be shitty. I'm going to have days where I feel really tired. I actually think is really important. Because that otherwise we get so locked into that anxious fight with sleep.
I agree 100%. And you're so right about like the average autistic or ADHD person has done the research. Like we
Hmm.
do the research, we go down those rabbit trails and like we figure out, okay, you can try this. Okay, you can try this. And then when someone lists it out for you, you get kind of frustrated because
Mhm.
you're like, I've already done this stuff. Right.
Mhm.
Well, have you tried mindfulness? Yes, I'm a fucking therapist. I know how to practice mindfulness. Have you
Uh-huh.
tried doing A, B, and C? And you're just like, is there any medication that you can give me and
Uh-huh.
to
Yeah.
be helpful? Which isn't really helpful anyway, because a lot of those drugs and medications are so harmful for you. The
Mhm.
ambient, all of the medications in the world designed for sleep are also designed somewhat in terms of anesthesia and putting you under for surgery. So it's not a
Mhm.
healthy way to get
Right.
sleep. It's just like
Right.
I need to get knocked out because otherwise I'm gonna go into like hallucinations and delirium and all of the
Yeah.
stuff that with sleep deprivation.
Yeah, it's good when you're like near psychosis to like, okay, I need one good night of sleep. But yeah, as a like every night solution, it's interesting. I don't know if, and I would just want to clarify, I'm not recommending this. I'm curious your thoughts. And I don't know if cannabis is legal where you are. It's legal in Oregon, and a a lot of people I work with get sleep relief from cannabis, and it makes sense to me just because a lot of the sensory stuff quiets down. So that's been interesting to see a lot some of my people experiment with and benefit from. I'll be curious to see as there's more research around that. And I'm not talking about like getting high. It's like a very low dose. There's even cannabis teas. I guess, yeah, you all don't have access to. Yep.
No, it's weird. And we could probably do a whole episode on, substances and neurodiversity, but I'm all for the legalization of cannabis all throughout the country, and the decriminalization. My wife, I'm gonna get myself in trouble with this episode today. Um, Works for the U.S. government, so like I can't do anything in my house that is illegal in the state.
Hmm.
Or I would definitely be trying every single combination under the sun. So the most I can do at this point in time is like CBD, melatonin, gummy type
Hmm.
situations. But it's interesting, and I want to. We could probably talk about this in lived experience too. But anytime I smoked marijuana as a high schooler, like in college, I got unbelievably paranoid, freaked out. Like,
Uh-huh.
obviously, you're not controlling the strain when you are
Hmm.
purchasing drugs when you are in high school. However,
Hmm.
I'm always curious about experiences because I've heard this from a lot of autistic people of like their experiences with marijuana were really negative. But
Mm.
I would love to see now that we have so much more, like we know the source, we can kind of
Hmm.
identify the strain for which purposes it exists for to see if that would be helpful. Because at this point, the only thing that's helpful, and it's not helpful, I've talked to you about this, is in the short term, alcohol is helpful at times
Mm.
because
Right.
it will knock me out, but then it will fuck up your REM and your circadian rhythm and
Yeah, it's not
everything.
good sleep.
Not
Yeah.
good sleep.
Yeah.
And sometimes you're just like, I need to fall
Yeah.
asleep,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
this is what I'm gonna default to. So, I think cannabis would be the lesser of two evils for sure.
I would agree with that. Cannabis versus alcohol sleep. Yeah. We're gonna, yeah, this episode, we're gonna get in trouble with this episode.
Uh,
Psychologist recommends cannabis. No, not
Listen,
recommending.
I,
Do your
I've
research, talk
always
with your
been
medical providers.
a harm reduction based therapist in
Yeah.
general, and I agree. Do your research. Don't take medical advice from us. But I do think that trying to figure this out for all of you listening, because I'm sure some of you are feeling like you identify with what we're saying and have similar experiences, and you know how torturous and hellacious it is. And Megan and I talked about our privilege in being small business owners last week. when it comes to autistic burnout, some of you have to get up and fucking go to work the
Mhm.
next day,
Mhm.
regardless of how much sleep you received.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I know what it was like working at an agency job or just being employed elsewhere, not getting sleep and having to call in because
Mhm.
I could not function. Like I could not get up. I couldn't drive safely. And it's so hard when maybe you don't
Mhm.
have the ability to just say, I another night where I didn't sleep, but I have to get up and go to work.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. As you were talking, I like have visceral memories intrude of when my kids were young. I when my son so my son, I now understand it's because he has sensory issues, but he didn't take to eating solid foods till 18 months, which means he nursed all the time, and we co-slept, and he would be literally like latched onto me nursing most of the night. Because he was hungry because he wasn't eating. And I also had an autistic 3-year-old who had a ton of energy, and we had no idea what was happening. So I was like barely sleeping, and I would wake up and I'd have to get up, right? I had a baby, I had a 3-year-old, I was the stay at home parent at that time in our life. I was on the verge of psychosis at one point. I remember I went up to my parents' house because I was like, I just need a night of sleep. Um, because I felt myself, like I felt my grasp on reality slipping, and it was terrifying. It was really terrifying. Um, and yeah, sleep, it's just a beast. And so for people out there who have had babies, and are autistic, oh my gosh, I feel for you. So I had 2 C-sections, I had complicated pregnancies, and then for the life of me, I could not sleep when the baby slept. I would have terrible, terrible insomnia. So my recovery from my surgeries were incredibly hard. Um, so I think it's interesting. There's very little, if you like Google um, autistic pregnancy or autism and pregnancy, you get all these things about like how not to have an autistic baby. But there's very little out there about being a person who's autistic and pregnant. And sleep, I think, by far, like worst issue during my pregnancies and postpartum period, which just made that whole season of life so excruciating.
That has to be so hard in so many different ways because you still have these responsibilities of I have to get up, I have to take care of my kiddo, like I have to do this thing and just losing your grip on reality, just being in that constant grief, that pain cycle, that exhaustion. I feel for you and anyone else who's had that experience and I it's hard. And you're right. You Google this stuff and you're going to see all this shame-based ableism bullshit of like how not to do this thing, how it's a negative thing if this is your experience and there's just not a lot of research done
Mhm.
on lived experiences in general right
Mhm.
now.
Yeah. 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 This episode's kind of depressing.
I was just like staring out my window like, "Oh, yeah." I mean, it's so challenging because so many of us rely on how our brains work too.
Mhm.
And they're just
Mhm.
not like I feel like I'm moving in slow motion when I have these type of
Mhm.
days or situations where I'm so used to like my brain rapid firing and moving really quickly.
Yeah.
And if you're moving through quicksand is how I kind of
Mhm. Yeah.
experienced it, where like everything just feels delayed and takes a bit longer to
Yeah. Yeah.
process or respond to. I got some messages today from my group practice staff. Love y'all. Not selling it, promise. Um, where I had to look at it like 5 or 6 times to be like,
Mm.
wait, what is this person asking me? And it was
Mhm.
and like
Mhm.
now that it's halfway through my day, I'm like, oh, it was actually like a really simple question to respond to. And
Uh-huh.
my brain just couldn't put those pieces together.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and for people who like control, actually, I thought about that too when you're talking about cannabis. I wonder if that's part of the paranoia for some autistic people is it's a like you're losing control of your thoughts and ability to put things into sentences. Um, So, but with sleep deprivation, the loss of control of like being able to organize our thinking, I think that can feel really claustrophobic, especially for autistic people where we value control a great deal. Um,
Sure.
yeah, I know for me, part of what's so hard on us, like after a bad night of sleep, I can't be as productive, and I um feel really bad when I'm not mentally productive. It feels like I have this constant kind of existential awareness that time is passing and I'll never get this time back. And it leads to this kind of anxious need to always be doing something efficient or effective with my time. So when I have a shitty night of sleep and then the next day I'm like, well, this is kind of a waste of a day. And so then I've got this double, like, two depressing things happening. One, because I didn't get sleep, my body's more depressed because of all of the sleep chemicals that what the brain does during sleep. But then because I'm not being productive, which is what gives me a sense of accomplishment and like a mood boost, it's this extra. One thing that helps me is I will tell myself, like, don't trust your brain today, in the sense of like, whatever you say about yourself or your future, it's going to be filtered through this depressive lens. So just don't trust it.
Yeah, I love that. That's so helpful for me and probably for so many people listening. Because I think I keep getting this is how my brain's working right now is you're saying things and I'm like, ooh, we could do an episode on that. Ooh, we could do an episode on that, which is great. But also like that's how scattered I feel. But
Mhm.
I think that productivity piece is important to address because so many of us are really we want to be productive, we want to have control over our day to day, and we get a sense of accomplishment for it. That dopamine hit is real for sure,
Mhm. Mhm.
and so often it's misidentified and wrongfully associated with like
Mhm.
hustle culture and like
Yep.
we're just obsessed with achievement. And it's like, no, 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 no. This is
Mhm.
actually like how I feel a sense of self. Like
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
that sense of pridefulness. It's also like checking the thing off the list, and that's really
Mhm.
helpful. It has nothing very rarely. I don't want to use blanket statements. It very rarely is about like hustle culture and grind culture and like
Mhm.
the next achievement and the next achievement and the next achievement. And I think that gets wrongfully missed a lot of the time.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I was actually just thinking about this the other day, how I spent, so I was in psychoanalytic depth therapy for 3 years before my autism discovery and then diagnosis. So there was a lot of things I was trying to figure out about myself. And one of them was this inability to rest and like exploring family of origin issues and trying to figure out like what is it either in my childhood or myself that like I cannot just be. Like that is very, very painful for me, just being. And then realizing like, oh, that's ADHD. Like, and that it maybe there's other depths things that layer on top of that. But at the end of the day, it's a neurological. There's a neurological reason that when I'm playing a board game with my children and my kids like not realizing it's their turn and I get impatient, I'm like, it's your turn. There's a neurological reason for that.
That's another great episode. I think we should do
Mhm.
that next week about
Okay.
like just what you just said is so profound and it's so vulnerable too of just like your lived experience of how painful it is to not be able to just be
Mhm. Mhm.
or to really struggle with that in general. And I
Mhm.
struggle with that too. And I imagine most of you who are listening also have a similar story or a similar feeling. I have always been described by parents, by friends, by early childhood, folks who were in my life as someone who was not comfortable in their own skin, who
Mm.
always had to
Mm.
be like moving or doing something. And it's still true today. Like I struggle so much to be present or in the moment or just experiencing life as it's happening.
Mhm. Mhm.
The shitty thing about the shitty thing about being a mental health professional and also an autistic ADHD person is you can't always practice what you preach, in my opinion. And like we don't in this profession a lot of the times, but even the things that we know to be true about like mindfulness and stillness and self-compassion and all the buzzwords that we like to use, I fucking hate it. Like I can't do it. And I try, and then
Mhm.
you can create this like inner frustration,
Mhm.
uh shame spiral situation where you're like, why can't
Yeah.
I just do this?
Yeah. Yeah. Which then gets reinforced when we maybe go to a therapist and um get taught these things. Like you were saying earlier, like, well, have you tried this? Have you tried this? Have you tried this?
Yeah.
And A, like maybe we've tried them, but B, we've tried them and they're really, really hard for us. Um, like mine. So I don't know if I came up with this term or if I learned it somewhere, but I actually started using it before I even realized I was ADHD. Mindfulness on the go. I really like it. It's been because I have alexithymia. Mindfulness has been huge for me because I know how I'm feeling because I'm identifying what scripts are playing in my mind. But I'm not sitting there and doing like a 10-minute mindfulness exercise. It's like as I'm going about my day, it's, oh, what script is playing right now? It's just I'm entering a different like mind space, but I'm doing it on the go. And I find things like slight adaptations like that of just take mindfulness and then find a way to do it on the go or to do like different versions of it, I think is really helpful for ADHDers. It's just we're not trained as clinicians how to adapt our interventions for ADHD and autism.
I love that. And if you did come up with that, you should trademark that shit and make that your own. But that makes me remember last week when we were talking and you had your smoothie in your hand and you were talking about like,
Uh-huh.
just being mindful of the sensation, the temperature of the
Mhm.
smoothie. If you take a drink of it, like if you put it down, the weight of it in your hand. Those
Mhm.
are the things that you can adapt and put into place instead of saying to yourself, I've got to do this mindfulness activity for the next 10 or 15 minutes and sit
Mm-mm.
here and I'm not
Mm-mm.
having this profound fucking revelation or
And feel like a
experience.
failure because I can't do it because my mind's all over the place. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then you go to your therapist and they're like, well, did you try to take away your distractions? And you're like,
Like my
how do
mind's
you
my
do that?
distraction.
Like,
Yeah.
that's my entire existence is a distraction.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so I am gonna make a plug, and I like feel kind of sheepish giving an intervention because we've talked about how dismissive it can feel. And actually, so I have a sleep workbook, and I do worry about that. I'm like, I work like people have told me it's helpful, but I also worry like I am talking about some of the conventional strategies, and then I worry that I'm setting people up for that kind of those feelings around I'm trying all these things and it's not helping. But here is one intervention that a lot of people find helpful. It's not going to be helpful 100% of the time. Again, there's got to be some acceptance of like, we're just going to have some shitty nights of sleep. It's what has helped me the most, in addition to like my sleep environment. Cognitive shuffling. Have you heard of this?
Mm-mm.
It's really helpful, especially for those of us with busy minds, because it's like something like counting sheep is not nearly active enough. So cognitive shuffling, there's a few apps that'll do it, like My Sleep Button walks you through it, or you can do it yourself. It's where you take, so like you would take a word like kitten, or actually, I'm trying to find a word that doesn't have a double letter in it, ocean. And you start with the letter O, and then you think of all of the words you can think of that start with O. It's like open, octopus. And then once you've expired that, you move on to C, and you do all the words that you can think of that come up with start with C. And what this does is it shuffles the brain enough and it fragments it that you can't have busy mind going at the same time. And it's mundane enough. It kind of mimics the first stage cycle of sleep by jumping from idea to idea. And so it can help with sleep onset. It's what I do when I wake up in middle of the night and I'm like, okay, there's hope I could fall back to sleep. I'll usually do cognitive shuffling. And it actually, I would say 8 times out of 10, I do fall back to sleep when I'm using that.
That is a wonderful strategy. And it sounds like that would actually be so helpful. Writing it down right now. What was the app that you mentioned?
My sleep button, and that's what I used first. And it was developed, I think it was developed by neuroscientists. And it mimics that first stage cycle of sleep. What I also do if someone needs an added layer of complexity, and if they don't have aphantasia, actually imagining the thing. So like for me, I'll do that. I'll be like octopus, and then I'll imagine either drawing an octopus or I'll imagine an octopus. And then the next word, like open, I would think of it, I would maybe draw a door opening in my mind.
I love this. And I'm writing this down too because I had one of my group practice therapists message our group chat today, just disclosing like massive, massive sleep issues and struggling significantly and wanting solutions. So I'm going to share that immediately
Mhm.
when I get off here because I think that is
Um,
so helpful. And you're right. Like the simplistic, like count sheep or count backwards or do these things, it's not stimulating enough. It's
mm-mm,
not going to
mm-mm.
get the brain to really settle down as much as it needs to. So I
Yeah.
really love that solution. And I think you should plug your workbooks whenever the hell you want on here because you've worked so hard on these things. Like Megan's workbooks are just unbelievable resources at your fingertips with these solutions and these strategies and these explanations and Megan's deep dives that she's doing, late at night or whenever the hell you're doing these things. And I mean, I am always very impressed by just what you're creating. And as a colleague and a friend, I just really want to say that and name that because I, I share your resources all the time with people.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that's the one workbook. Maybe I should add like a disclaimer to it. It's just there are a lot of strategies that I walk through. Because for me, like learning these strategies, they don't all work 100% of the time, but they have helped me improve my sleep a lot. So I want people to have access to them. But I do worry that learning all these strategies, and then if they're still struggling with sleep, that would just perpetuate the shame
Right.
spiral. Uh,
And I think that's with any of this stuff for all of you that are listening and struggling with some of this, the acceptance piece, like Megan mentioned
yeah,
a couple of times, is so crucial of like, I'm going to try these things and we're going to see what sticks.
yeah.
And having acceptance over having a lot of shitty nights or hopefully less shitty nights
Mhm,
than you need to. But, I think when we hear like, this is what you should do, this is what you're supposed to do, and then
mhm,
it
mhm,
doesn't work, it just creates further division, right? For those of us who already feel like, but nothing works. Why
mhm.
is nothing
Yeah,
encapsulating
yeah,
my experience? Like,
right.
so we see you, all of you
Mhm,
that have had those experiences at your doctor, at your therapist, with your friends, colleagues. Like, we see you, and we know how shame-inducing it can be when it feels like you don't get it. You can't
mhm,
figure it out. This
mhm.
isn't designed for me.
So I'm having a thought as I'm listening to your talk. I think a lot of us have like a lowercase t traumatized relationship to sleep. So if we put sleep in like a relational term and we think about if we zoom out from all these strategies and these skills and we think about what is a person's relationship to sleep? If a person has a traumatized, stressful relationship to sleep, and then if that gets reinforced by their efforts to improve it, like through medical visits or through the different strategies they're trying, sleep is always going to be difficult until you heal the relationship to sleep, which is why I think acceptance is so important because that lays that framework of I'm going to make friends with sleep. I might not like that sleep is an issue, but I'm going to heal my relationship to sleep. Because if we have a traumatized, strained relationship to sleep, sleep is always going to trigger stress associations, which is going to make sleep so incredibly difficult.
Couldn't say it better myself. I agree 100%. And that's just really, really wonderful advice for everyone listening. And I'm going to take a lot of Megan's advice tonight and try to start implementing some of this stuff. Um, yeah, I love that. So thank you for naming that and just kind of sharing that too. I don't know what I expected today, but I think this went pretty well, uh, even with the divergence going on. So I think that this was a really good conversation about a really challenging topic. And I'm sure we could have more conversations around this topic and expand on it as well. And, answer questions and go more in depth with the strategies and just really honing in on that acceptance piece. I think that's the big one that I'm coming
Mhm,
away with is the acceptance of your brains work differently, your body's regulating differently, you're experiencing things differently, and some nights are just gonna fucking suck. And
mhm.
just making peace with that. It's not you. It's just we've got to adapt and figure out some strategies that work specifically for your experiences too.
Hmm. Hmm. Absolutely.
So, for everyone listening to the Divergent Conversations podcast on all major platforms, new episodes out every single week. We appreciate you showing up, and we appreciate you just trying to make it through today and figuring out what comes next and strategies that work for you and specifically for you. And we will see you next week. So, goodbye.